It was the year 58 BC when Roman general Gaius Julius Caesar marched his legions into Gaul. He was walking into a world little known to him and his people, but that was on the edge of history for millennia: Celtic Europe. These lands weren't urbanized in the sense of Mediterranean cities of that time, but were nonetheless well developed and very well connected through large hill forts known as oppida. These oppida were the centers of religion, administration and power. But from 58 BC onwards, this is where war would be waged, as Caesar invaded and conquered Gaul. His victories reshaped political and social life in Gaul and effectively wiped out the oppida from the historical record, as they were destroyed, abandoned or replaced by newly founded Roman cities. However, not all the oppida suffered the same fate. And in fact, some of these oppida would remain in use for centuries, while others would be completely reinvented as Gallic symbols of a bygone age. So what happened to these Gallic oppida, and what can their ruins still tell us today? Let's start from the beginning. For thousands of years, small settlements on the Atlantic coast and European rivers had exchanged goods and traded with each other, establishing social relations, sharing beliefs, ideas and material culture in the process. They spoke different dialects of a shared Celtic language and recognized each other's gods as their own. And from the start of the first millennium BC, chieftains and local kings started expressing their power through similar means as well, by building hill forts. For hundreds of years, these hill forts became increasingly large and complex, as did Celtic society, until at the start of the 3rd century BC, something changed. On a massive scale, small settlements and hill forts grew into nucleated and walled settlements exhibiting a high degree of social organization. These were the oppida. While previous hill forts were mostly just a few hectares in size, oppida were more like small cities and could encompass tens or even hundreds of hectares and be home to thousands of people. The walls were elaborate and highly defensible fortifications of wood and stone that could be up to 10 kilometers in length. It is estimated that the walls of the oppidum at Manching, for instance, required 60 tons of iron for its nails alone. The interior of an oppidum was often shaped by a series of regular streets and roads, along which could be found houses and buildings with specific public functions. Often positioned on a mound or hill, these urban spaces featured a commanding view of the surrounding landscape and were strategically positioned along established trade routes. Oppida thus became hubs of power, administration and commerce, where traders would settle and craftsmen would produce many stunning artifacts of bronze, silver and gold. It's easy to understand how these oppida attracted the gaze of a certain Roman general. When in the middle of the 1st century BC, Caesar invaded Gaul, the oppida were at the height of their development and became a prime target for Caesar's legions. For despite his military brilliance and fame in our own age, Caesar was heavily in debt and needed gold to settle them quickly. This led him to treat the Gauls with exceptional cruelty, selling off an approximate 1 million of them into slavery and looting settlements even after they had surrendered, leading to the condemnation even of his contemporaries in the Senate. On one such occasion, the Aduatuci were caught in a supposed misunderstanding, when after surrendering they walked out of their oppidum. When Caesar saw them passing through the gates, he claimed an attack and ordered his troops to avenge this breaking of their peace agreement, slaughtering men, women and children indiscriminately and taking all the plunder they could find. After Caesar's destructive wars, it wasn't until the reign of his nephew and successor Augustus, some 40 years later, that Gaul would effectively be integrated into the Roman world. Roman cities were now founded close by the oppida that would become the new centers of power and administration, connected to Rome through its extensive network of well-maintained roads. Gallic elites quickly moved to these new administrative centers to gain Roman favor and retain their influence. And as economic opportunity and livelihood moved with them, so too did the general population. Within a mere 50 years after its conquest, the Gallic Oppida were dismantled, abandoned, or destroyed. But although from this point on the Oppida effectively disappear from the historical record, they weren't all simply abandoned. Over the decades, archaeological excavations in the ancient Oppida have created a more nuanced and human image of the period after the Roman conquest. The findings suggest that some Gauls chose to linger in the ruins of the ancient Oppida and rebuild their old homes. The ruins of other Oppida found themselves well located next to the new Roman road system and hosted small inns housing travelers. Other Oppida were used as garrisons to house soldiers during Caesar's wars who would be settled there after their service. Organically, these Oppida would be transformed into Roman cities. But some Oppida in the southeastern part of Gaul show a particularly remarkable development from the 1st century AD onwards that tells us a lot about how Gauls dealt with their new reality of Roman rule. At Cadnet, Vidauban, Hyères and other sites, sections of the ancient Oppida seem to have been partially maintained and even restored. In the center of these ruins, at their highest point, we find a new sort of structure, built during the Roman period. Shrines dedicated to Celtic deities. At these shrines, more than 10,000 broken silver or bronze rings have been found, a way of offering which is reminiscent of Iron Age practices in which items were deliberately broken. Inscriptions have been found here as well, giving offerings to Caudelenses, Rudianus and Dexua, a goddess who is specifically linked to a small Gallic tribe of the region, the Dexivates. In the northern part of Gaul, we see this happening as well at Elewaid, where finds indicated the horse god Epona was still being worshipped there by a small cult. Why these ancient Celtic Oppida were chosen as sites of religious worship during the Roman period is not immediately evident. At only a few of these Oppida, evidence has been found to suggest there had been shrines before Roman occupation. It seems therefore that the Oppida in the Roman age gained a new function as religious sites because of their perceived historical meaning and the memories retained in their ruins. Through the historical meaning of these sites, religious practices too gained new meaning. The shrine of Celtic deities towering above the landscape as the Oppida had done before, the walls of old now symbolically demarcating as sacred space. What we see here is the Oppida being used to shape cultural memory in the present. The Oppida became sites of remembrance. It is important to keep in mind here that reference to tradition does not mean its actual continuity, but a renegotiation of sorts of what it means to be Gallic in Roman Gaul. In this way, the Oppida show us a fascinating peek into the lives of those Gauls who did not choose to fully adopt the Roman ways and Romanize in the new cities that grew out of other Oppida, but instead chose to hold on to their ancient cultural practices. While some Oppida were destroyed in Caesar's wars, others transformed into cities, while others still would be simply abandoned and forgotten. These Oppida, turned to Celtic shrines, show us how Roman Gaul was not simply Roman.